This is Monica Perez, and we are here for part two of our reading and discussion of Report from Iron Mountain. And you will see I have two hard copies, slightly different. This one actually has an author on the front, Leonard Lewin, and this one doesn't because this is the original 1968 first edition. This is the 1996 reprint, which I got because in it, in Appendix 2, is a very controversial document that has been absolutely suppressed. So I had it before. I used to talk about Report from Iron Mountain 10 years ago, and I easily accessed that document, and now it cannot be found. And I discovered that it was in this book, and I ordered the book, and it is in fact there. So we're going to start with that. I'll tell you about it in a second. One thing was, though, last time I said, the guy was throwing out, Leonard Lewin was throwing out some names, and I recognized Herman Kahn, but I couldn't remember what was so interesting about him. So I reminded myself, looked it up. I had AI do a little bit of research. I think AI isn't bad as just like your typical search engine, Google Wiki thing. But like my daughter's totally against it because she says that when you have it write your papers, you don't know how to write or think anymore. But I wouldn't use AI to generate music. I don't think. I don't think anybody's doing that on my behalf. And but it does synthesize information. So anyway, here you go. Herman Kahn's On Thermonuclear War, which he wrote in 1960, analyzed the potential consequences of nuclear war, arguing. Okay, sorry. I completely have to pause for a second. I have a little emergency. Can you guys wait a second? Please hold. Be right back. Thank you for your patience. So crazy. I have this forever baby. So my 22-year-old is like a 2-year-old. Actually, I might actually have a problem here. I might have to reschedule stand up. Hold on for a second. Okay, folks, that was super, super nice of you to stand by. Can you hear me? Are we back in action here? Oh my gosh. My my son who has Down syndrome, it's funny, am I muted still? Can you not hear me? Hello. Okay, thank you. So he just loved his school and he just wanted to keep going to his school even after he graduated. So he volunteers there and he takes little public transportation, but he missed the transportation. So I had to send him an Uber or just crash out and run and get him. Anyway, looks like it's gonna be okay. Um, and there it is. That'll work. That is pretty convenient, I must say. Okay. So all right, so we've got this Herman Khan thing for crying out loud. All right, so this guy Herman Khan was I think he was the inspiration for Doctor Strangelove, and there was another movie I remember, Fail Safe, which wasn't like a comedy, but it was the same kind of thing as Doctor Strangelove. And it was about this guy kind of pioneering uh being so cold and calculating that he didn't think about the the moral implications of it. And he and it was shocking. So when you read Report from Iron Mountain, which we're going to do, it's shocking how divorced from any kind of shoulds, what do you call that? Like normative or whatever. So he wrote how thermonuclear war, this was in 1960, he wrote how it could be survivable. So I don't even know if nukes are real. Like I really don't know. I've heard the guy say like they could not, the German scientist who examines the evidence from Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Could those have been nuclear weapons? Do they look like ordinary weapons? Why would there be like a cloud of ash? It should be incinerated. So, and it looked a lot like Dresden, which was firebombed. Yeah, so maybe it wasn't ready at the time. Maybe it's theoretically impossible. Maybe it's real. I don't know. I think it's really telling that. So, right now, on this moment, it's June 24th, 2025. Donald Trump, who's the president right now, um, he blew off some bombs on Iran to supposedly hit their nuclear things, which he said they destroyed. But the DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, is saying, oh, we just like blew the doors off, whatever. Regardless, I saw on numerous different news outlets where the nuclear fallout shelters are for the United States. Like you should know where your nuclear fallout shelter is in case we're in a nuclear war with Iran that we're bombing to prevent them from having nukes since they don't have nukes. And I'm pretty sure they don't even have a nuclear program. Their nuclear program and facilities are energy and some medical stuff. So they've got us all hyped up about fallout shelters here in a situation that cannot possibly be a nuclear threat unless it's a false flag. So I wonder how much of that super, super nuclear, like the fallout thing, stop, roll, and duck or whatever, stop, duck, and cover, I don't know, was real, and how much this is him like leveling it up, playing into that. This was 15 years after Nagasaki and Hiroshima, and he's saying actually nuclear war could be winnable. And in fact, the only nuclear weapons that were ever dropped were those weapons. And I mean, nobody else had the weapons, but it did stop there. Of course, I think we gave the formulas to the Soviet Union so you could have an arms race. You can't have an arms race if there aren't two in the thing. So he said, all right, we shouldn't just be thinking about we avoid nuclear war at all costs. It might happen, and let's think about that. So he says nuclear war is survivable. This was the thing that was really cutting edge of him to say. Nuclear war is survivable. And it's important to mention the reason Report from Iron Mountain was written about the possibility of peace is that they were saying that nukes made war impossible, just like Tesla wanted, a super weapon that was accessible to everybody that would end war as we knew it. They were saying this might actually happen. If we're afraid of going to war, then nobody will believe in that threat. So maybe Khan was saying, maybe it was like a super double fake, and he was saying, oh, no, we can still go to war. Don't worry, we can still go to war. But he wrote this in 1960. So all this stuff, these things that are supposed to be parodies or real examinations or whatever, all the really cold calculating stuff. And they're living in that world now because of the JFK assassination, 9/11, all the screwed up things COVID, all the things that the capital T they have done, it is just completely devoid of any moral. I mean, when you see people jumping out the windows of 9/11, I don't know if people think that's fake or what, but the terror of those people on the 9/11, on the 911 calls that day, all of that. I mean, somebody did that. And so I guess this guy is saying you could have a war. It is survivable. Even a large-scale nuclear exchange would leave a significant portion of the population alive and capable of rebuilding. It says civil defense matters. You need fallout shelters. Basic measures could dramatically reduce casualties and accelerate recovery. I don't know about that. Maybe not. Deterrence is crucial. You need a credible nuclear deterrent, including second strike capability. So if somebody thinks that they can get the jump on you, it's just going to automatically destroy that justifies that, which seems like a crazy thing to do. Strategic targeting. What was it? Was it in Strangelove or Failsafe or whatever? They could destroy the entire Earth. Like that's their second strike capability. Strategic targeting. So nuclear weapons should be thrown at military assets rather than civilian populations so that humanity could rebuild. Can you imagine what it would be like if you kind of took out all the stuff that makes everything work, industry, dams, electro, whatever. The winnable war. He said one side could emerge even after suffering considerable damage. And you can imagine all these things like one day after, or like there were all these post-nuclear apocalyptic, there's TV, film, books. I mean, it's a sci-fi pillar. And then he also came up with, in a different book, the ladder of escalation. I think it has 44 rungs in this ladder of where we go. And I was wondering where we were today. Are we in sable rattling? They've actually popped off a little bit. It's really not looking super real to me. I mean, I'm not saying people aren't getting hurt. I'm not saying it isn't going to escalate. I know Gaza and Syria are real. But Iran, I've thought that those guys were an inside job for a while. And I mean, I don't know. Somebody leaked the name of their nuclear scientist to Israel, so they say. Anyway, so that's Herman Khan. Let's read this. There's a bunch of appendices and things to read in this book. I'm not going to read everyone every time, but we have to read this one first because this is the pillar on which it stands that this is a plausibly real book. The Herman Khan stuff was real and it's similar. Anyway, this is the thing that's impossible to find. This book will go up in value. I think I paid $15 for it. The 1996 hardcover Report from Iron Mountain, I'm guessing will go up in value after this. Appendix 2, The Washington Post Book World of November 26th, 1967. News of War and Peace You're Not Ready For by Herschel McLandris. And Herschel McLandris was a pseudonym, a nom de plume of John Kenneth Galbraith, who was, I believe, a historian and economist at Harvard. He was a multidisciplinary guy, which was one of the criterion for being on the 15-person team who wrote this report. Okay. He says, this is a book review. 3 questions are raised by the unauthorized publication of this deeply controversial document. The first concerns its authenticity. The second concerns the validity of the several considerations that caused one of the authors, on his own motion and in violation of his implicit oath, to release it for publication, and the collateral question of whether Within the genially accepted ethical framework of the free enterprise system, Dial Press was justified in publishing it. The third question concerns the empirical theoretical validity of the conclusions. So he at no point is saying that it's a hoax. And by the time it was published, it says on the back, a book review that calls it a hoax is printed on the actual book in 1968. As to the authenticity of the document, it happens that this reviewer can speak to the full extent of his personal authority and credibility. In the summer of 1963, I received a telephone call from a scientist friend, a well-known astronomer, physicist, and communications theorist. This was on the eve of my departure for a month-long seminar on modern psychometric theory at the Villa Serbelloni in Italy. I was asked to attend a meeting a week hence to discuss a project of high national influence at Iron Mountain in upstate New York. I knew the place well, for Iron Mountain was the working headquarters of the committee of selection set up by the Chase Manhattan Bank, that's Rockefeller, which, after establishing working criteria, designated the nucleus of bank executives to be protected in the event of nuclear attack. But the Italian meetings were also of high urgency and had been planned long in advance. Accordingly, I was forced to decline. I was then instructed to keep the invitation strictly confidential. On 2 subsequent occasions, I was consulted by the psychiatrist and specialist on the relationship between individual and group behavior, whom, more than incidentally, I recommended to take my place. Okay, so he recommended this guy, a psychiatrist and specialist on the relationships between individual and group behavior, to take his place. I've concluded that I do not now violate any controlling ethical precepts in relating this history. As far as I personally am concerned, it leaves no doubt as to the credibility of this document. The public would not be more assured had I written it myself. This is what he's saying. He's saying it's real. And that is why this book review, is virtually impossible to get your hands on. As to the ethics of the author in releasing it, I do have grave reservations. In a democracy, there must be the fullest and frankest and freest discussion of all matters of fundamental public concern. On this issue, there can be no compromise. It is what makes us a free country and a leader of what the Secretary of State has called the free world. But the precise timing of such democratic discussion is of the highest importance. As a matter of elementary prudence, it should not occur before the public is psychologically conditioned to the issues. But that just means you're exceeding your authority. Because if you kept your behavior within the confines of our federalist system, you wouldn't have to condition the public to understand what you were doing in their name with their money behind their backs beyond the authority that you've been given. I don't know. Anyway, otherwise, there is danger that anger, hysteria, or immature and unsophisticated moral indignation will replace conditioned perception of fundamental truth. The authors of this, you know what? It all fucking came from, we were involved in a nuclear war. Why? Because we were involved in a world war, which I think could be argued is never a just war. And it certainly wasn't our war. It's time after time in those world wars, they're not on our doorstep. And yet we needed to send something that would kill 80,000 people halfway around the world. You should never have to do that. You should never have to do that. So there never, in a private system, there never would have been nuclear weapons as they are described to us. So it's this kind of backroom bullshit. Sorry, I know sometimes there are people like, oh, my kids are listening. I don't think your kids are listening to this one, but that cascades into needing more. Like the technology that's created by government subsidies that bypass the labor capital trade-off of investment. And then you have all this technology that the world isn't ready for. Because if it were ready for it, it would have been on that horizon of labor shortage and incremental capital adoption, not COVID. Just saying, oh, no one's allowed to work. We're going to burn through all this stuff and nobody's allowed to touch anything. So let's, give everybody, every business an iPad and eliminate all the people. Like, I mean, it's just always ask when something seems like this intractable fundamental issue that requires that we give up our rights, figure out why you're in that position in the first place. Chances are there was a policy that took away your rights before that or violated your authority, your agency, your trust before that. The authors of this document rightly saw that the public was not yet prepared for a rational discussion of the indispensability of war for the preservation of the modern social fabric. And I'm sure that didn't happen before. It wasn't critical like this before these world wars created that dwarfed the regular economy. For generations, there has been intense socially unscientific conditioning to the opposite view. This cannot be quickly offset. In recent years, it is true that at the Institutes of International Relations, at the leading universities, at the Hudson Institute and RAND, and in seminars for the discussion of peace and international conciliation, there has been analysis of what, suggestively, is still called the unthinkable. New scholarly disciplines have come into being, schooled in systems analysis and game theory, which are capable of considering objectively the relative social advantages and disadvantages of differing levels of annihilation. But the public impact of this work has so far been limited. In consequence, the public is not now prepared to deal rationally with the kind of discussion this report will provoke. The member of the special study group who decided upon its premature release bears heavy responsibility for his action. At an absolute minimum, it should first have been discussed at strictly off-the-record meetings with responsible and conservative congressional leaders, key private citizen in New York, and sympathetic editors. Only then should the public have been brought into the debate. I would posit that is what happened, that they brought it out here because, look, there were no consequences. There were no consequences, but just like the trauma of JFK or Nixon, you just raped the naivete or whatever of the public. You made them absorb it without any ability to change it. It's like Agenda 21 or whatever. There's a whole bunch of sub ones. Artura. That there are all these. So like Agenda 21, what do people do? They did not like that. And that would be kind of like this. So Rosa Quarry and some others got people going, and people went to those meetings, and there was a lot of noise about it. And she said, I believe it was she who said, they stopped coming when Trump got elected because they said he would take care of it, because he said he would take care of it. And now it's underground. So they might have resisted, but then what happens? Then you get JFK, then you get Nixon. I mean, you get overwhelmed. The third, and they like that. So they maybe timed it to be, just when people were still reeling from JFK or Vietnam and poised to be drowned out by the Nixon stuff. I don't know. Third question concerns the conclusions. Here one can be brief, for these, without question, are thoroughly sound. Stand by. It's a little crazy here today. Stella. A watched frog never boils. That's really, really funny. Harry says, I read about Khan and Abella's The Soldiers of Reason, a history of the Rand Corporation. Too bad there isn't a less hagiographic book on Rand. Well, I'm going to have to look up hagiographic. I've heard of hagiography, but I guess I let that one slip through the cracks. Harry says, yes, both world wars, Vietnam, Iraq, etc., all wrong. True. My father said that too. Yes, The conclusions are sound. He says it's inevitable that they would be. The reaction to war hitherto has been moralistic, emotional, and even oratorical. This is the first study of its social role to be grounded firmly on modern social science and buttressed by modern empirical techniques. Seriously. Okay. Modern empirical techniques as extended and refined by computer technology. That it should find that war provides the only dependable system, quote, for stabilizing and controlling, end quote, national economies. That is the source of the public authority that makes stable government possible. That is indispensable sociologically for the control of, quote, dangerous social dissidents and destructive antisocial tendencies. I think this all comes from society being too big, from them leveling up, from them destroying intentionally, from the Civil War to the 60s, using civil rights as an excuse, but that is not the reason to make our laws, our policies, our borders at this point 350 million people big across different geologies and geographies and borders with different history and different sources of income. If you don't do that, if you don't intentionally blur the political or the physical lines of people from different walks of life, different agriculture versus industrial and all of that, you don't have these social pressures, in my opinion. You have a very understandable community that where there are failings, you know how to help. And coupled with religion, which as much as people can say, oh, it's done bad, it's been hijacked to do bad. But when the people feel like, they pray, they ask for help, and they want some credit in the bank. So when they see somebody hard on their luck in their small community, they're going to help them. I think these problems are a function of the society they created with the war thing. When they took all the boys out of all the small towns for World War II, maybe World War I, I don't know, but they destroyed them one after another. And I think they knew it. And I think they still do it today with sleepaway college. I think they know exactly what they're doing. They're creating these problems so that they can solve them their way with control, stabilizing and controlling national economies. That's exactly what he's saying, controlling them. War serves an indispensable Malthusian function. And it has long, quote, provided the fundamental motivational source of scientific and technological progress, is only what was to be expected from any soundly conceived scientific application of modern team research. I believe that the scientific and technology stuff definitely comes out of the wars, and they want it to. You're getting VR, and they're testing it on people who've lost their sight. They're prosthetics, using your brain to move things. All of that stuff is derived from and excused by saying we're helping these handicapped people whose arms and legs we just blew off, by the way. So I think it's true, but it's not that it's the thing that spurs it. It's that you don't need it if you have a naturally stable society that's matured, where the houses are built and the potatoes are growing. You just give each other massages all day. No, they want to level it up, and these are the methods they use. Anyway, sorry, I don't mean to keep interrupting this guy. I thought this was going to be the most interesting thing, and it is. But it's pregnant with so many false assumptions because that's what the intellectuals do. Many of us, no doubt, would have stressed additional advantages. In recent times, it has been my privilege to draw attention to what is now being called, perhaps a bit awkwardly, the anticipatory retrospective national guilt complex as an important motivational factor growing out of war. They're anticipating a national guilt complex over Vietnam. I mean, they got it, but they were anticipating it while it was still raging. and would rage for years more. It deserves a word of explanation. In wartime, the disruption of family life patterns, combat morbidity and mortality, and in those countries suffering actual combat or air attack, destruction of personal property, civilian casualties, defoliation of landscape, and malnutrition have caused, and this is capitalized, perceptive thought leaders who previously had been relatively indifferent to the well-being of others to anticipate the guilt feelings of the community when in post-war years it comes to reflect on how some individuals and subcultures have suffered more than others for the common good. I got to find a book right now. Here it is. In Retrospect by Robert McNamara. Wasn't he the Secretary of Defense during Vietnam? The tragedy and lessons of Vietnam. Yeah, he's anticipating this. When was it? He was the Secretary of Defense during Vietnam. And when did he write this? Wow. Not until 1995? Yeah. So it looks like it took 20 years for them to have the retrospective guilt thingy. Accordingly, while the war continues, these PTLs, perceptive thought leaders, address themselves to planning measures of amelioration, full employment, GI Bills of Rights, homes for heroes, international peacekeeping arrangements, physical reconstruction. I mean, these are all ways they continue to rule the world after the war. This is it's like the it's called the Reconstruction era. New power dams and irrigation projects and such international relief efforts as those of Herbert Hoover and UNRRA, UNRRA. What does that stand for again? Anyway, which will act as a social solvent for guilt by providing those afflicted with a compensating economic or moral gain. The years immediately following any war, as a result, are ones of no slight social progress on various national and international fronts. This progress only comes to an end as the feeling of war guilt is exercised and normal psychological patterns of thought are restored. But this is a detail, as I would put my personal repute behind the authenticity of this document, so I would testify to the validity of its conclusions. My reservations relate only to the wisdom of releasing it to an obviously unconditioned public. Okay, so how do people answer that? This guy saying that personally, because he said it in his column. He was a book reviewer for the Washington Post, but he did it under a nom de plume. And because he wrote the review in that article, which did not say John Kenneth Galbraith, people are like, well, he was just joking. Like, that does not sound like a joke. And that is why you cannot find this on there, on this thing. All right. Well, enough, I would say, of the side comments. Let's get back to where we were. All right. So I'm going to the original because that's how I do. We are up to, okay, this is a statement by John Doe, who I believe is the person who decided to release it. Contrary to the decision of the special study group of which I was a member, I have arranged for the general release of our report. I am grateful to Mr. Leonard C. Lewin for his invaluable assistance in making this possible, and to the Dial Press for accepting the challenge of publication. Responsibility for taking this step, however, is mine and mine alone. I am well aware that my action may be taken as a breach of faith by some of my former colleagues. But in my view, my responsibility to the society of which I am a part supersedes any self-assumed obligation on the part of 15 individual men. Since our report can be considered on its merits, it is not necessary for me to disclose their identity to accomplish my purpose. Yet I would gladly abandon my own anonymity if it were possible to do so without at the same time compromising theirs, to defend our work publicly if and when they release me from this personal bond. So if he had his name out there, then this wouldn't be at all a possibility of being a hoax. But this is secondary. What is needed now, and needed badly, is widespread public discussion and debate about the elements of war and the problems of peace. I hope that publication of this report will serve to initiate it. Okay, the report of the Special Study Group. Here it is. Finally. No, letter of transmittal. What the hell is that? To the convener of this group. Attached is the report of the Special Study Group established by you in August 1963. That is when the guy said he was contacted. To consider the problems involved in the contingency of a transition to a general condition of peace, and 2, to recommend procedures for dealing with this contingency. For the convenience of non-technical readers, we have elected to submit our statistical supporting data totaling 604 exhibits separately, as well as a preliminary manual of the peace games method devised during the course of our study. We have completed our assignment to the best of our ability, subject to the limitations of time and resources available to us. Our conclusions of fact and our recommendations are unanimous. Those of us who differ in certain secondary respects from the findings set forth herein do not consider these differences sufficient to warrant the filing of a minority report. It is our earnest hope that the fruits of our deliberations will be of value to our government in its efforts to provide leadership to the nation in solving the complex and far-reaching problems we have examined, and that our recommendations for subsequent presidential action in this area will be adopted. So I wonder if there are foreigners on it, and I wonder, I'd be curious to know who sits on the board of the Rand Corporation, because they're saying it is our government, it's us. I think by the time they're writing stuff like this, it's not about the people of the United States as served by their government. Because of the unusual circumstances surrounding the establishment of this group, and in view of the nature of its findings, we do not recommend that this report be released for publication. It is our affirmative judgment that such action would not be in the public interest. The uncertain advantages of public discussion of our conclusions and recommendations are, in our opinion, greatly outweighed by the clear and predictable danger of a crisis in public confidence, which untimely publication of this report might be expected to provoke. Yeah, they can't control it, so they don't want to do it. The likelihood that a lay reader, unexposed to the exigencies of higher political or military responsibility, will misconstrue the purpose of this project and the intent of its participants seems obvious. We urge that circulation of this report be closely restricted to those whose responsibilities require that they be apprised of its contents. We deeply regret that the necessity of anonymity, a prerequisite to our group's unhindered pursuit of its objectives, precludes proper acknowledgement of our gratitude to the many persons in and out of government who contributed so greatly to our work. Okay, September 30th, 1966. So I guess it took 3 years. Introduction. The report which follows summarizes the results of a 2.5-year study of the broad problems to be anticipated in the event of a general transformation of American society to a condition lacking its most critical current characteristics, its capability and readiness to make war when doing so is judged necessary or desirable by its political leadership. Hey, maybe what they're doing, because they were knee-deep in the war. And what did Herschel McLandris, John Kenneth Galbraith say? They go through the process of the mea culpa. They go through establishing peace organizations. And maybe this is a way for them to either justify war, which they're engaged in, or assure you that somebody's working on it, which I think is basically the purpose of like Congress going back and forth over Obamacare, and you're on that, oh my gosh, it's one vote. Somebody's working on it. Oh, we lost. So close though. So maybe they're saying, look, don't worry about it. Government functions so well that these guys are really thinking about what's in our best interest. Don't even think like maybe they just want to keep making bombs or anything. It's like, this is secret. They really mean it. they're really doing it for us. So funny. Okay. Our work has been predicated on the belief that some kind of general peace may soon be negotiable. The de facto admission of communist China into the United Nations now appears to be only a few years away at most. It has become increasingly manifest that conflicts of American national interest with those of China and the Soviet Union are susceptible of political solution. Despite the superficial contraindications of the current Vietnam War, of the threats of an attack on China, and of the necessarily hostile tenor of day-to-day foreign policy statements, it is also obvious that differences involving other nations can be readily resolved by the three great powers whenever they arrive at a stable peace among themselves. It is not necessary for the purposes of our study to assume that a general détente of this sort will come about, and we make no such argument, but only that it may. Okay, so they're on the record saying if China, Russia, and the United States collude, they can control the entire world. And this was over 50 years ago, maybe pushing 60 years ago. So maybe they did it. You know, like it looks like they did it, right? So maybe it was already done. And maybe this is a way to make it sound good. It is surely no exaggeration to say that a condition of general world peace would lead to changes in the social structures of the nations of the world of unparalleled and revolutionary magnitude. The economic impact of general disarmament, to name only the most obvious consequences of peace, would revise the production and distribution patterns of the globe to a degree that would make the changes of the past 50 years seem insignificant. By changing them back to where they were before, political, sociological, cultural, and ecological changes would be equally far-reaching. What has motivated our study of these contingencies has been the growing sense of thoughtful men in and out of government that the world is totally unprepared to meet the demands of such a situation. And didn't Ron Paul say, like, how are you gonna stop the war? How are you gonna end this? I said, well, we just marched them in. We can just march them out. We had originally planned, when our study was initiated, to address ourselves to these two broad questions and their components. What can be expected if peace comes? What should we be prepared to do about it? Hey, by the way, you could just do it. You could just let it treat. I don't think that's a real word. Like attrition. You could just cap the budget, cap the defense budget right now in today's dollars. Do not make any allowances for inflation or anything. And the way inflation's going, it'll go through the roof, or it'll make that, it'll dwarf, it'll make that much smaller, or it'll give these people financial discipline to not inflate the money supply if they really want that defense spending so bad. And then it would just dwindle away. It should be like, this is funny. I was trying to figure out like what would be a legitimate defense expenditure for us, since we spend well over $1 trillion. That's more than half of the defense money spent in the world. And what would be like a real number for us if we actually had allies, which we say we do. And I was thinking like 250 billion. And of all people, Ahmadinejad, the Iranian guy, one of the Iranian presidents from probably 10 years ago, said the same thing. It's like the fair number is 300 billion. I mean, I don't know how he came to that, but there's a number. And over time, you could get down to that number just by inflating it away. And then you would have adjusted over that time, which would probably be 20 years, which would be fine. We had originally planned, when our study was initiated, to address ourselves to these two broad questions and their components. What can be expected if peace comes? What should we be prepared to do about it? But as our investigation proceeded, it became apparent that certain other questions had to be faced. What, for instance, are the real functions of war in modern societies, beyond the ostensible ones of defending and advancing the national interests of nations? In the absence of war, what other institutions exist or might be devised to fulfill these functions? Granting that a, quote, peaceful settlement of disputes is within the range of current international relationships, is the abolition of war in the broad sense really possible? If so, is it necessarily desirable in terms of social stability? If not, what can be done to improve the operation of our social system in respect to its war readiness? The word peace, as we have used it in the following pages, describes a permanent or quasi-permanent condition entirely free from the national exercise or contemplation of any form of the organized social violence or threat of violence generally known as war. It implies total and general disarmament. It is not used to describe the more familiar condition of Cold War, armed peace, or other mere respite, long or short, from armed conflict. Nor is it used simply as a synonym for the political settlement of international differences. Our founders were pretty sharp. They did not allow for a standing army. I mean, that was, I forget when it plugged in. Was that even like after the Civil War? Was that why they called up the states? Right? Didn't Robert E. Lee have to decide which state he was going to fight for? I don't know. Have to brush up on that. But, it wasn't, those guys knew what they were doing. The magnitude of modern means of mass destruction and the speed of modern communications require the unqualified working definition given above. Only a generation ago, such an absolute description would have seemed utopian rather than pragmatic. Today, any modification of this definition would render it almost worthless for our purpose. By the same standard, we have used the word war to apply interchangeably to conventional hot war, to the general condition of war preparation or war readiness, and to the general war system. The sense intended is made clear in context. The first section of our report deals with its scope and with the assumptions on which our study was based. The second considers the effects of disarmament on the economy, the subject of most peace research to date. The third takes up so-called disarmament scenarios, which have been proposed. The fourth, fifth, and sixth examine the non-military functions of war and the problems they raise for a viable transition to peace. Here will be found some indications of the true dimensions of the problem, not previously coordinated in any other study. In the seventh section, we summarize our findings, and in the eighth, we set forth our recommendations for what we believe to be a practical and necessary course of action. All right, section 1, scope of the study. Man, this seems real to me. It seems like just the kind of thing. If it weren't full of macabre and terrifying stuff, it would be boring. Oh, thank you for the like. If you are sitting there in front of the computer, could you hit like? I've never asked for likes before, I don't think, not too often. So let's see how many I can get just by sitting here. I should have asked you to do that when I was trying to get my crazy errant son back. He is too much. He's quite humorous. It's very amusing. And the worst is over with that kid. It's a forever thing, but it keeps me young. All right, scope of the study. When the Special Study Group was established in August 1963, its members were instructed to govern their deliberations in accordance with 3 principal criteria. Briefly stated, they were these: 1, military-style objectivity; 2, avoidance of preconceived value assumptions; 3, inclusion of all relevant areas of theory and data. So that's to be objective, they have to be totally non-judgmental, and they have to bring in all the data and theory that they think applies. All right, these guideposts are by no means as obvious as they may appear at first glance, and we believe it necessary to indicate clearly how they were to inform our work. For they express succinctly the limitations of previous, quote, peace studies. So, as far as a host goes, this isn't really making me laugh. You know what I mean? Dr. Strangelove made me laugh. That was a parody. I always think that. Someone's like, I was joking. It's like, you were joking? Was it funny? Did anybody laugh? You know what I mean? It's not funny. And imply the nature of both government and unofficial dissatisfaction with these earlier efforts. Okay, so peace studies have failed in the past. It is not our intention here to minimize the significance of the work of our predecessors or to belittle the quality of their contributions. What we have tried to do, and believe we have done, is extend their scope. We hope that our conclusions may serve, in turn, as a starting point for still broader and more detailed examinations of every aspect of the problems of transition to peace and of the questions which must be answered before such a transition can be allowed to get underway. It is a truism that objectivity is more often an intention expressed than an attitude achieved. But the intention, conscious, unambiguous, and constantly self critical, is a precondition to its achievement. That is true. If you're not even trying, you're not going to get there. I think you can be objective. I mean, if you have discipline of mind, I do think that you can be objective. Like in a situation like this where they probably don't care. They're probably basically immoral anyway. So, I mean, who knows what kind of IQ test they had to take or like emotional test. When did that Henry Murray, was it, who wrote The Assessment of Men? When did he get the Congressional Medal of Honor for that? I think it was around this time or earlier. They might have given these guys that psych test or just been able to observe it according to the criteria they measure in those psych tests, which I wouldn't be surprised they could do with these guys. Somebody who's put it all out there in academia and stuff. We believe it no accident that we were charged to use a, quote, military contingency model for our study. And we owe a considerable debt to the civilian war planning agencies for their pioneering work in the objective examination of the contingencies of nuclear war. There is no such precedent in peace studies. Much of the usefulness of even the most elaborate and carefully reasoned programs for economic conversion to peace, for example, has been vitiated by a wishful eagerness to demonstrate that peace is not only possible, but even cheap or easy. Hold on. Did this guy, so this is Iron Mountain, which is a Chase thing, right? Which is Rockefeller. Did he say that Rand was paying for it? He mentions Rand in here. Remember the Herschel McLandris thing? It says, in recent years, the institutions of international relations, Hudson Institute and Rand. Okay, he's saying that that Rand et al. Have discussed this stuff. I don't think he's not saying outright that they paid for it. Oh, okay, here we go. This is good. Good. Hold on. One official report is replete with references to the critical role of dynamic optimism on economic developments and goes on to submit as evidence that it, quote, would be hard to imagine that the American people would not respond very positively to an agreed and safeguarded program to substitute an international rule of law and order. I guess he's saying for war. Of course they would not. They wouldn't trust it. That's why. Not that they wouldn't prefer it, but they wouldn't trust it and it wouldn't work and it didn't work and it's not working. Another line of argument frequently taken is that disarmament would entail comparatively little disruption of the economy since it need only be partial. We will deal with this approach later. Yet genuine objectivity in war studies is often criticized as inhuman. As Herman Kahn, the writer on strategic studies best known to the general public, put it, quote, critics frequently object to the icy rationality of the Hudson Institute, the Rand Corporation, and other such organizations. I'm always tempted to ask in reply, would you prefer a warm human error? Do you feel better with a nice emotional mistake? And as Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara has pointed out, that's in this one, a long time ago, in reference to facing up to the possibility of nuclear war, quote, some people are afraid even to look over the edge. But in a thermonuclear war, we cannot afford any political acrophobia, fear of heights. Surely it should be self-evident that this applies equally to the opposite prospect. But so far, no one has taken more than a timid glance over the brink of peace. An intention to avoid preconceived value judgments is, if anything, even more productive of self-delusion. We claim no immunity as individuals from this type of bias. But we have made a continuously self-conscious effort to deal with the problems of peace without, for example, considering that a condition of peace is per se good or bad. This has not been easy, but it has been obligatory. To our knowledge, it has not been done before. Previous studies have taken the desirability of peace, the importance of human life, the superiority of democratic institutions, the greatest good for the greatest number, the dignity of the individual, and the desirability of maximum health and longevity, and other such wishful premises as axiomatic values necessary for the justification of a study of peace issues. We have not found them so. We have attempted to apply the standards of physical science to our thinking, the principal characteristic of which is not quantification, as is popularly believed, but that, in Whitehead's words, it ignores all judgments of value, for instance, all aesthetic and moral judgments. Yet it is obvious that any serious investigation of a problem, however pure, must be informed by some normative standard. In this case, it has been simply the survival of human society in general, of American society in particular, and as a corollary to survival, the stability of this society. By the end of this, and I don't know if they start just saying it outright, it seemed to me it was about the preservation of the hierarchy. And as civilization was progressing rapidly through the nuclear war era and what that meant, it's almost, I'm reminded of the ancient Chinese empires, whatever, where they would suppress technology because they knew it would change society, and they might not be on top anymore, probably wouldn't be. So I think by the end of this, I concluded without reservation that these guys were just, that when they say the survival of human society in general, American society in particular, and the stability of the society, and it talks about the hierarchy throughout the book, I think they're just the most self-serving thing. And then if you watch, it's called Executive Action. It's about the JFK assassination. And from what I heard, I believe it was James, they call him Jesus Angleton. His mother would call him James Jesus Angleton. But I think on his deathbed, or was it Howard Hunt? Maybe it was Howard Hunt. One of them said that was the closest thing to the truth, executive action, as to what actually happened. And maybe we should review that with Scott and Bobby. That might be interesting. Anyway, it was about themselves. It wasn't about, what if it's not the ideal society? Okay, well, you got to stop somewhere, right? It's interesting, we believe, to note that the most dispassionate planners of nuclear strategy also recognize that the stability of society is the one bedrock value that cannot be avoided. Everybody wants the stability of society. I was just asking that question. Secretary McNamara has defended the need for American nuclear superiority on the grounds that it, quote, makes possible a strategy designed to preserve the fabric of our societies if war should occur, end quote. A former member of the Department of State Policy Planning staff goes further. A more precise word for peace in terms of the practical world is stability. Today, the great nuclear panoplies are essential elements in such stability as exists. Our present purpose must be to continue the process of learning how to live with them. We, of course, do not equate stability with peace, but we accept it as the one common assumed objective of both peace and war. I will say, I am not looking for revolution. I do not want, I'm living in rubble, and it's temporary, clearly temporary. I want for nothing. And it's terrible. So, I mean, I'm not recommending it. Revolution would be terrible. Real social instability would be terrible. But like I said, you don't really have to do it that way. Just, if you just start saying, we strictly do not bomb other countries, and we're going to let this stuff just kind of gradually shrink, the rest of the economy will grow. And for certain, stop with the AI stuff, stop with all the government funded research, and let people work. It just, one person can grow more potatoes than he needs. Another person can grow more fucking eggs. So, it's as simple as that. And you can just let it evolve. Devolve? I don't know. The third criterion, breadth, has taken us still farther afield from peace studies made to date. It is obvious to any layman that the economic patterns of a warless world will be drastically different from those we live with today. And it is equally obvious that the political relationships of nations will not be those we have learned to take for granted. Sorry, I was reading your comments. It is equally obvious that the political relationships of nations will not be those we have learned to take for granted, sometimes described as a global version of the adversary system of our common law. But the social implications of peace extend far beyond its putative effects on national economies and international relations. As we shall show, the relevance of peace and war to the internal political organization of societies, to the sociological relationships of their members, to psychological motivations, to ecological processes, and to cultural values is equally profound. More important, it is equally critical in assaying the consequences of a transition to peace and in determining the feasibility of any transition at all. They said there were 604 supporting documents. I'd love to see them. If they want, I'd just like to know how they make their decisions about sociological relationships and such. Because they're probably right. And it's probably based on stuff we don't have access to, but would be very helpful if we understood their assumptions or their knowledge. It is not surprising that these less obvious factors have been generally ignored in peace research. They have not lent themselves to systematic analysis. They have been difficult, perhaps impossible to measure with any degree of assurance that estimates of their effects could be depended on. They are intangibles, but only in the sense that abstract concepts in mathematics are intangible compared to those which can be quantified. Economic factors, on the other hand, can be measured at least superficially, and international relationships can be verbalized like law into logical sequences. We do not claim that we have discovered an infallible way of measuring these other factors or of assigning them precise weights in the equation of transition. But we believe we have taken their relative importance into account to this extent. We have removed them from the category of the intangible, hence scientifically suspect and therefore somehow of secondary importance, and brought them into the realm of the objective. Yeah, that's why I want to see their stats. I want to see their 604 documents. The result, we believe, provides a context of realism for the discussion of the issues relating to the possible transition to peace, which up to now has been missing. This is not to say that we presume to have found the answers we were seeking, but we believe that our emphasis on breadth of scope has made it at least possible to begin to understand the questions. All right, that's a lot of Flarkin preamble. But the next section, which we will get to at our next interlude, disarmament and the economy, which I think is probably like the number one thing people think about and care about. This is a shorty, babes. Shorty. So that was 2. We probably got, 3 left. And then maybe we'll hit something meatier. Well, this certainly is meaty for what it is, but it's like a filet mignon. Next time, maybe we'll look for it. The makers of the modern mind is like a porterhouse. Anyway, thank you all for coming. I'm sorry for the disruption, and we'll see you next same bat time, same bat channel.